But for now, our theme over the last few weeks, well, a couple of months actually, well, a month or so, has been encounters with reality. So we've been looking at stories from, for example, the life of the Buddha and the texts of the Buddha's life, and we're going to be looking at other sources where reality has, in a way, broken through to somebody and said something, given them a teaching. So what we're going to do tonight is hear from three people talking about, if you like, their encounters with reality, occasions when reality has spoken to them and given them a teaching. So we're going to start with Daniel, I think. Is he here somewhere? There he is. We're going to start with Daniel, and then Suryamati, and then Dave. So we're going to have three short talks on what reality said to me. So first of all, Daniel.
Okay, so encounters with reality. It's a bit of a heavy topic, and we'll see how I do with it. So the story that I want to recount starts on a meditation retreat at a retreat centre in our movement called Padmaloka. And it was a meditation retreat looking at the Anapanasati Sutta, which is a discourse from the Buddha about using the breath in meditation to kind of come into closer and closer contact with our experience. And that was something that I very much did on that retreat. The whole spectrum of my experience, from the painful to the blissful, and a lot of just the humdrum, a lot of, just neutral, boring sensations. But I really became much more attuned to how transitory my experience is. So both on the level of these ever-passing mental states, but also in terms of these sort of constantly changing micro-sensations that make up our experience. And I was on a retreat this weekend actually at the centre, and Kamlanandi said something in meditation that I found really interesting. She said, "In the midst of stillness, nothing stays the same." And I felt like I was really coming to sort of see this in my experience on this retreat. But also, I was sort of experiencing in a very clear way this sense of self that we all encounter, the driver that we feel is sort of sitting behind our eyes and driving our experience. I could see that my experience was constantly changing, but I also felt this real conviction that amidst all this flux, there was also something really permanent and unchanging that this experience was happening to. So this seemingly permanent, unchanging sense of being was something that I was really reflecting on whilst being on this retreat. What is it? Where is it? Where does it come from? What does it feel like? Is it real? Is it not? So it's really fascinating to see in me this little sort of kernel of self, this strong sense that despite being able to see how transitory my experience is, there's something that feels very sort of permanent and unchanging, even eternal about it. But of course it's not just this little kernel, because actually this sense of a permanent self is something that really dictates so much of our behaviour and our approach to life. And the Buddha called this eternalism, and he held it up as one of the principal wrong views that human beings cling to, that cause us a huge amount of suffering because it's not in accordance with how things are. So Buddha said the unchanging self that we experience is nothing more than an illusion, just a refraction of consciousness. The extent to which I held this view about myself was really highlighted to me about midway through this retreat, when the retreat leader really encouraged us to make the most of our remainder of our time on the retreat, because after all, he said, it could be the last retreat you ever have. You might drop dead tomorrow. And it's really interesting seeing almost instantly a voice in my head went, yeah, whatever, I'll be back next year. And this was this wrong view talking, this deep part of myself that sees myself in some way as eternal. Yeah, of course I knew about death in some sort of, intellectual level, and I'd experienced the death of people, quite close relatives in my family. But it was really interesting to see sort of erupting from my subconscious, this view that somehow I would be exempt from all of that. Well, yes, I'll die someday in some sort of theoretical way, but it's not going to be before next year, and it's definitely not going to be tomorrow. So, this was sort of where I was on this retreat. And so I left the retreat the following week, full of all of this energy and optimism, and really looking forward to the next year when I get back and have another go at unpicking this knotty problem that I've been looking at. And so I got in my car, was driving back from retreat, and I was with Martin, who lots of you will know from the Sangha, who's out on pilgrimage in India at the moment. And we were driving back on the A roads of Norwich, which for anyone who's done the drive knows are very treacherous. You get stuck behind cabbage lorries and tractors and all sorts of things like that. But we made it through the A roads of Norfolk and Lincolnshire. And I was driving on the M18 just between Doncaster and Sheffield on the home straight of the drive. And I was in good spirits, lots of chatting with Martin, really enjoying just sharing our retreat experience and catching up. And it had been a bit rainy, but nothing really concerning. And I was really keen to get home, so I was hammering it down the M18. And I was overtaking cars in the outside lane, and all of a sudden, I saw on the road in front of me this enormous pool of water, like a puddle of water in the outside lane. And there was nothing that I could do before I hit that puddle of water. And did so, and completely lost control of the car. And I was probably going about 80 miles an hour at the time. And I remember just after losing control of the car and just sort of spinning around everywhere, and I realised what was happening. I just turned and looked at Martin. And it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but everything was just so clear and vivid, really sharp. And I just remember waiting for something to hit the car, just with this quite strangely calm acceptance, and just thinking, this is it. Just waiting for that moment. And luckily, I don't know how, the car left the motorway across the two inside lanes. It was a busy afternoon on a Sunday. And I drove the car up an embankment about that steep and managed to park the car on the top of the embankment, facing down onto the busy motorway. God knows how I managed to do that. And funnily enough, actually, the AA man came and he got out of his van and looked up and went, "Oh, I bet that's the best piece of parking you've ever done." But a really genuinely close shave, had the car either hit or been hit by another car on the motorway at that speed, so the initial impact of the accident was one of really deep shock, and the possibility of my own death being just a moment away, being shown to me in really graphic technicolor, and reality had made the inevitability of death not only undeniable but tangible. Death no longer seemed like something that just happened to others. It could no longer be something that my unconscious, rooted in this self-absorbed eternalism, could just relegate to this sort of vague future possibility. So after the initial shock, I just remember feeling this really strong sense of connection with Martin and gratitude for his presence, and of course just massive relief that no harm had come to him. And beyond that, at the time, I just really went into job mode, getting us safely back home. And the deeper effects of this brush with reality took some time to unfold. So one thing that my mind turned to really strongly in the hours and days following the accident was the relationships in my life. And it really called to mind verse 6 from the Dhammapada. There are those who don't realise that we are all heading for death. Those that do will compose their quarrels. So I had a really strong desire following the accident to contact my family and close friends, just to obviously let them know that I was okay, but just reconnect and reaffirm my relationships with them. And people often say that a brush with death really brings into perspective what matters in life. And the thing that came into sharp focus for me was just how important the connections that I have with others are. And alongside that came this need to reflect on how happy I would have been with the state of those relationships and my conduct within them had I left them behind at that moment. And whilst I didn't have any really major quarrels in my life at the time, I did realise that I had let certain important relationships in my life, I just took them for granted, particularly within my family actually. I took for granted that they would always be there for me and that I would always be there for them. So with this, I think just came this renewed resolve to strengthen these relationships and to conduct myself as openly and skillfully as I could within them. But also to just bring to them an enjoyment and appreciation that I think just comes with things that we see as being impermanent. So the second reflection that preoccupied my mind following the accident was to do with conditionality. So one of the most important, if not the most important teachings of the Buddha is that of Praticca Samuppada, which means conditioned co-production, dependent origination, mutual co-arising. And what these slightly clunky phrases point to is the unique insight, the direct and clear seeing that the Buddha had into the nature of things, that all phenomena arise in dependence on causes and conditions, and that if those causes and conditions change or cease, so too those phenomena change or cease. So we've got a rather beautiful carving over there of a formulation of this principle. This being, that becomes. From the arising of this, that arises. This not being, that does not become. From the ceasing of this, that ceases. So it's within this worldview that the Buddha rejected the eternalistic possibility that anything existing in a permanent and unchanging way in and of itself. So I can't claim to have attained penetrating insight into the truth of Praticca Samuppada following this accident, unfortunately. But in some small way, I was able to get a glimpse of reality that the words of this teaching are pointing at. So my life, as all of our lives are dependent on a very complex and at times very fragile set of conditions. I mean, in a sense, it's a miracle that we are alive and breathing and conscious at all. And this really complex set of conditions that keep me alive and breathing and conscious were revealed in all of their fragility as I spun off the motorway in this set of events that I had absolutely no control over whatsoever. And my mind obviously couldn't reflect on how things could have turned out so differently for me and Martin had any one minute part of that set of conditions been any different. So to put it really crudely, the accident showed me that as conditioned beings, death is always at the door. So, what to make of this? So in a sense, this was the big question that reality was asking me. And when I was reflecting on this, I was reminded of a quote from a Buddhist author called Stephen Batchelor that I had noted down years and years ago, and I went and looked it up. And it says, "Since death alone is certain, and the time of death uncertain, what should I do? Since death alone is certain, and the time of death uncertain, what should I do?" So I think this is a question that all people are faced with when reality shows us the inevitability of death. In a sense, it's the biggest question of life. So given that our lives are finite and could end at any minute, how should we live? And this was a question that I'd reflected on before, but this experience on the way back from retreat had given it this fresh and renewed sense of urgency. And many different people seem to have very different responses and reactions to this question. And I think the most common in our culture seems to be this sort of carpe diem approach. So since I could die at any moment, I should fill my life with as many pleasant experiences as I can, seizing each day as if it were my last. And I think part of me was waiting for this, some sort of big realisation like this, some deep desire to radically alter the way that I lived and seizing my life with both hands and really start living. Yeah? Except this didn't happen. Yeah? I went back home, I cooked spaghetti, I went to bed, and And the next day I got up and went to work. Life carried on. So I didn't know what the answer to this question of living life well in the face of death was, but I knew that wasn't it. So if seizing the day meant living my life in pursuit of big experience after big experience, then that wasn't for me, because after all, the Dharma teaches us that it's grasping after experiences and wanting our lives to be in a certain way that causes so much suffering. And I think it was after a lot of reflection and discussion with friends that I realised that what gives my life meaning is not having particular experiences or being a particular person, but the set of values that I live my life by. So I think I hadn't felt the need to radically alter the way that I lived my life after the accident, because I was trying to live my life as best as I could in accordance with a set of deeply held values, values exemplified by the life of the Buddha, the teachings of the Dharma, and the context of the Sangha. So the answer for me of how to live life in the face of death is simply to live in a way that honours these values as deeply and authentically and progressively as I can. And I think that if I strive to do this, then I trust that the experiences of my life will take care of themselves, and they will just unfold in a natural and straightforward way, free from too much neurotic craving around what a meaningful life looks like and what I should be doing to have one. So I think if I can do this, then perhaps I can meet death whenever it comes with a bit more peace and clarity, knowing that what gave my life meaning was the values that I strove to serve rather than the experiences that I had. So I'll just finish by asking that question again. Since death alone is certain and the time of death uncertain, what should I do? Thank you.
So, Daniel's experience was a very, very sudden one. Mine is something that happened much more slowly. In fact, it's a learning from experience, a learning in two parts, really. And the two lessons were about 10 years apart. And the first one, in fact, took probably a year to sink in. So, we're going back to 1991. 1991, I had just changed jobs. I had worked for a big bank as an IT project manager. And actually, I wasn't unhappy in that job. In fact, the job had taught me a lot. It had given me a lot of confidence. It ticked a lot of boxes for me in terms of self-development. I'd done a lot, I'd taken a lot of responsibility, I'd been challenged with things that scared me, and in some ways I quite enjoyed it. It was extremely well paid. I had a company car, I had a mortgage on a big house that I really liked, I had a pension, I had all the things that you get from working for a financial institution. And it wasn't especially unethical. I mean, there was a kind of corporate culture that wasn't particularly pleasant, but actually what I was doing was working on the systems that keep a record of all your money transactions, the amount of money you've got in your bank, and the subtraction and addition that happens when you pay things out and buy things and so on. So actually it was quite a useful job in a way. And it wasn't especially stressful. If you could cope with people shouting at you about how much it was costing them for every minute that your system was out of action. Because if our databases were down, then the bank couldn't carry on its normal business, and that used to cost a lot of money. But, so, I wasn't unhappy in the job, but I had just come across the Dharma. And that had really kind of widened my vision of what life was about, and had given me an aspiration to work at something more altruistic than making money for this particular bank's shareholders. So in 1991, I took a job for a very, very different organisation. I took a job for a small charity called, small, fairly obscure charity, even then, and even more so now, called Dial UK. And Dial UK was a small charity that supported a network of advice centres that were run by disabled people to give advice to disabled people. And yeah, it was one of the most vivid years of my life, and I'm going to tell you what happened in the first year in this job. So, yeah, I really liked the cause. My father, for the last decade of his life, had had a very disabling condition, and he was a wheelchair user, and I knew how difficult life was for him and for my mother, and how little help they had, actually. I mean, in retrospect, I realised that they were entitled to lots of help to make life easier for them, but they hardly got any of it because they just didn't know it was available. And I really wanted to help disabled people to kind of get the information they needed on their entitlements. So I really liked the cause. I wasn't so sure about the job. I'd taken a job as the information officer responsible for distributing all the information that was needed by the advisors in these advice centres. Well, you know, I was used to mainframe computers, expensive software, whole teams of really skilled technicians, really sophisticated software. And what I started this job with was mounds and mounds of paper, a very old PC and an admin assistant. So, you know, it was, I wasn't confident that I could do it, actually, after my highly paid job at the bank. And I could also see there were problems with the organisation. I hadn't been long there before I realised that the gung-ho director of the organisation, whom that Anya christened Strawman Norman, he had huge aspirations for the organisation that were way beyond the amount of money that I knew must be coming in. And about 3 months after I started the job and realised that actually this couldn't be sustainable, the trustees of the organisation reached the same conclusion and they sacked the director, so he went. And then I began to worry that there wasn't very much money coming into the organisation, and that in fact the money that the trainer I was working with was meant to be earning for us. He was doing all these disability training days for all sorts of highfalutin organisations that seemed to require him to take lots of equipment home with him, and took lots and lots of days for him to travel and then to deliver this training. None of the money came in, and when I finally began to follow up why this money wasn't coming in, I realised that actually it wasn't coming in because it was a complete fabrication, that he wasn't doing any of this training. He'd taken the equipment and sold it, and he was just taking lots of time off. I then discovered that he was a con man with lots of previous convictions for defrauding charities, and he was taken off by the police from the office. Then the administrator who was trying to make sense of the finances, I didn't quite have a breakdown, but she confessed that she couldn't do anything with the finances and she left for another job. Then the fundraiser, who hadn't managed to raise any money at all in the time that he'd been there, got into the job because he said that the organisation wasn't, he said he couldn't believe in the organisation and he couldn't believe anybody else would, so he left. And within 7 months of starting work, everybody had left. Every other staff member, every volunteer, and there was just me. And we couldn't recruit anybody else because by that time I had sorted out the finances and I realised that we were headed for bankruptcy. And then a few other things happened. My mother died very suddenly of a stroke, and I was involved in the funeral arrangements, the clearing of her house, and all of the things that happen when someone dies. The office we were working in was flooded twice, and I had to take up soggy carpets and deal with the landlords and the plumbers. We were burgled. There was hardly anything in the office worth pinching, but I had got a good printer for sending out the information, so that went. And then one evening, leaving the office at 10 o'clock after I'd been working late, I was working desperately hard to try and pull things together. I found the window of my car had been smashed and they'd taken the task disc and the radio. I then had to tell the landlords that we couldn't pay the rent. I then had to go and consult insolvency advisors about what you did when you were bankrupt. And I then had to go cap in hand to the Department of Health and various charitable trusts that had never even heard of me, and say, well, you know, I'm from this organisation called Dial UK and we could do with some money really. And funnily enough, I never thought of leaving. And it's partly just stubbornness and determination not to be beaten, which is definitely part of my character. But actually, it was more than that. Before we went into full-time crisis mode, I'd visited quite a few of the advice centres that we supported. And they were run by little groups of disabled people. And they were really fabulous groups of people. They were really, really motivated to help both themselves, they were very much self-help groups, but also to help other disabled people in their area. And some of them weren't very good, they weren't very efficient, but some of them actually gave really, really good advice. And so between them, they did either a little or a real lot of good to the disabled people in the communities that they served. And I began to realise that the organisation really was making a difference to a lot of disabled people and helping them to live with independence and with a bit of dignity. And I realised that I really wanted the organisation to survive and thrive. And I made another realisation because when I would go out with my friends in the evening and tell the latest story of what would happen, and they all laughed just the way that you did when I said, you know, and when they were really incredulous about what mess the organisation was in and asked if I was going to stay, I realised that actually there was a sense in which I was happy. Well, I mean, not happy in many senses, but actually I was happy in the sense of being satisfied in a part of myself that the bank had never reached. I suppose there was some part of me that wanted, even if it was difficult, to be serving something that was bigger than me, and that was, well, yes, that was just bigger than me, that was bigger than me and my wants. The bank had been very good at providing for me and my wants, but actually, this organisation, Dial UK, gave me a fraction of the material rewards, but it really gave me something to devote myself to, in a way something to love or something to serve. And I realised that I really, really wanted that in my life, and that actually it made me much happier than I had been previously. So I suppose you could say, well, reality was teaching me what we tell all of you on, I think it's the first week of the Infamous course. Yes, it is, we did it last week. Happiness comes from within, and it comes from acting more in accordance with the reality of interconnectedness. So, first lesson, very simple, very basic, really. But actually, just to say it is easy, but to learn it in your guts is something else. Was for me anyway. So, just changing the subject a bit. Some of you were here last November. How many people were here at Sangha Day in November? Quite a few of you. Okay. So at Sangha Day in November, Padma Vajra, our president, who was here for Sangha Day, to my great surprise, very kindly rejoiced in my merits. He rejoiced in my merits as chair of Sheffield Buddhist Centre. And when you know what it's like when someone rejoices in you, you kind of feel a bit embarrassed and a bit surprised and a bit flustered. And your memory just completely fails you. I can only remember one thing that he said when he rejoiced in me. But the thing I remember because it struck me, he said, and she really loves Sheffield Buddhist Centre. And it's true, actually. I love the Buddhist Centre and I love the Sangha. Not in a particularly warm and fuzzy way, not in a sentimental way. But actually, I love what Sheffield Buddhist Centre represents. I love what we do for people. I love the fact that all of us are united in our kind of values and in our practice of Buddhism and in our aspirations to kind of, well, to practice, to improve ourselves and to improve the world for the benefit of the world. I love it. And I suppose that I think that I learned to love in that way at Dial UK, and I particularly learned through all the difficulties that I had to face in that first year at Dial UK. So that was my first lesson, that there's a part of me actually that is made happy by being able to devote myself to something bigger than me and to really serve it. And in case you wonder how it all ended, some of the people that I went begging to actually came up with some emergency funding. And I and the trustees kick-started the charity back into life. And I stayed there for another 9 years. It was probably the hardest 9 years of my life, actually. It was never an easy organisation to run for all sorts of reasons. But I loved it. And I put a huge amount of effort into it and a huge amount of creativity into it. I worked incredibly hard. And I kind of lived and breathed it for the time that I was there. But there was an adjunct to that lesson that came 10 years later. By that time, I had left Dial UK. I was in a new job, a less kind of time and energy-consuming job. I decided that I just needed to get a life back, really. And I had a rekindled interest in Buddhism. I first came across the Dharma shortly before meeting Dial UK. And I kind of let it dwindle, came back to it 10 years later. And one of the things that I learned with my rekindled interest in Buddhism was that I probably needed to apply a little bit of what I'd learned at Dial UK to my Buddhist practice. I began to get excited about the Bodhisattva ideal, the ideal of practicing, devoting everything we do, really, our Buddhist practice and our whole lives for the benefit of all beings. Began to be really excited by that ideal. And then reality gave me another little nudge. I had kept in touch with quite a lot of people who worked in the charity sector. And one evening I met a friend and she said, "Oh, have you heard what's happening at Dial UK?" And I discovered that Dial UK was facing bankruptcy again, that it had made most of its staff redundant, that most of its volunteers had left, that it was teetering on the edge of closure. And I was completely gutted. I was really, really upset. I felt as if everything I'd done over the nine and something years that I had been at Dial UK was kind of for nothing. All that hard work, all that graft, all that effort had just come, the organisation had just come full circle and it was dissolving into nothing. And, there were several reasons why everything had fallen apart again. And I won't go into that now because it would be far too long a talk. But the experience taught me something about something about objects of devotion, I think, about the things that we choose to serve. I think that acts of service and devotion are in themselves very, very skillful actions. They benefit other beings. I think that during the time that I was at Dial UK, my action and those of people that I worked with did benefit a lot of people. So that kind of serving those altruistic causes is very much in line with the Bodhisattva ideal. They help others, and actually working for a cause like that is also very good for us, because I think that devoting ourselves to something in that way just helps to erode that kind of me focus, that kind of self-focus that most of us have naturally. So working for that kind of cause is a good thing. However, ultimately all causes, however altruistic, are reliant on conditions that are impermanent. So, one of the things that we teach on the Newcomers course, all things are impermanent. And that was certainly the case with Dial UK. We can't control everything in an organisation, especially an organisation that's run by many different people, with very different worldviews and very different values, with very varying degrees of greed, hatred and delusion. And that's to say nothing of the kind of forces that are at work outside an organisation that also have an effect: economic forces, social forces, political forces. So there's a sense in which, if we're working in samsara, however altruistic the cause is, well, we can't control it. And we shouldn't, in a way, expect anything to last. We shouldn't expect that things will always go well. And even a great cause, like the wonderful Sheffield Buddhist Centre that I love so much, is, well, we're in samsara. Maybe we've got a slightly better chance than Dial UK of surviving and thriving because, the people involved in the centre do have more of a united vision, we're more united in our values and in the things that we practice. But we're not exempt from samsara. The forces of the conditioned world operate here too. The only cause that is permanent and that won't ultimately crumble is reality itself. And that is, I realised, what was meant by this mysterious Buddhist jargon that I heard at the Buddhist Centre second time around, this going for refuge to the three jewels, that I always thought was a bit of a weird phrase. Well, it is a weird phrase, actually, isn't it? But it is a weird phrase, but I began to realise what it meant. There's something... there's something that basically looking for satisfaction in worldly things, even altruistic causes, is likely to lead ultimately to dissatisfaction, to disappointment. And Buddhists believe that there are three things that can give permanent satisfaction, and the reason that they can give satisfaction is that they're intimately connected with reality. Well, in a sense, they are reality. So those three things are the ideal of aligning ourselves with reality, so the ideal of enlightenment, which is represented by the Buddha, the nature of reality itself, just the way things are, and the teachings that help us move towards a realization of that, which is, of course, the Dharma. And then the community of people who have realized the ideal, which is, of course, the Sangha. And I suppose if we're talking about people who have realised the ideal, we're talking about the enlightened Sangha. But there's a sense in which we have all, to some extent, to some small degree, realised the ideal, and to that extent we are the Sangha. So I finally got it that what was likeliest of all to make me happy was devoting myself more and more to the three jewels, to the things that were likely not to let me down and disappoint me. And when I finally got around to devoting myself to Buddhist practice, it took me an awful long time. I was a very slow starter. When I finally got around to it, that first year at Dial UK meant that I wasn't going to be put off by doubts and difficulties. And a very, very real difficulty that had put me off practicing Buddhism the first time round, which was a difficulty with puja, just fell away when I realised that actually what puja is about is a kind of externalising, a kind of expressing devotion to the things that are most important to us. And if that's what we're doing in a puja, well, I was up for that because I did realise that I wanted to devote myself to the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha. So from that was a turning point in my life, really. That second lesson. And from that point on, I was able to devote myself wholeheartedly to living a more and more full-time Buddhist life, which has led to the life I live now, really, which is a very privileged life in a way, because I am able to devote most of my time and most of my energy to working at the Sheffield Buddhist Centre and, helping the Sangha to grow. And of course, not everyone has that privilege. But there is a sense in which we can all devote ourselves to something. And you might like, as a follow-on to this course, to think about, well, what do I devote myself to? What do I devote my time and my energy and my love to? And are there things that I could devote more time and energy and love to? So I'm very grateful to Dial UK for that year of disasters that started me off in a life of devoting myself to something more than myself.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You have felt it your entire life. That there is something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there. It's like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. So, you could be forgiven for thinking this is some sort of ancient Buddhist text, but it's not. It's actually, what Morpheus says to Neo in the film The Matrix. So he goes on to say, the Matrix is everywhere. It's all around us, even now in this very room. You can see it when you look out of your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. That you are a slave. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. You've been living in a dream world, Neo. I first heard these words when I was about 9 or 10. These words there, they really spoke to me. It was like reality was really speaking to me through this metaphor of waking up, this idea of living in a dream. And it's something that stayed with me really throughout my whole life since that first sort of vibration with these words. It's really stayed with me. I was talking to a friend Mark about this, and he pointed out that for Sangha, he first sort of came in contact with Buddhism by reading the Diamond Sutra. And for me, my first contact was Keanu Reeves, really. This was my first sort of contact with something a bit different, something a bit behind the scenes. That's very humbling. So this myth of waking up, this myth of reality. So first, I want to say a little bit about the importance of myth. We've heard that enlightenment, reality, it's non-conceptual. You can't really describe it. You can't describe it in words. You can't describe it in concepts. So it has some quality in a way that lives between words, that lives behind words, but lives behind what we can intellectually think. And there's a great line from Milarepa, which is one of Tibetan's most famous teachers, most famous yogis. And he says that having embraced the spirit rather than the letter, I forgot how to play with words. So he's pointed to something behind the words, behind this metaphor. And that's why myths are useful. The myths they're a kind of window that you look through and see a deeper spirit. If you could explain a myth away, it wouldn't really be a myth. It points to something deeper. So a deeper truth that's experienced in whatever way. So the Buddha he taught using lots of myths and stories and symbols, and often it's described a bit like a finger pointing to the moon. So myths are a finger pointing at something. So you don't focus on the finger, you don't focus on the myth, but you try and see what it's pointing at. So this is this metaphor of the myth of living in a dream, of waking up from a dreamlike state. This is what vibrated with me really from the first time I heard these words. So I was thinking about talking basically about this experience or this myth of waking up, and about the context of I heard it in The Matrix. And part of me was just thinking, this is not an acceptable source for reality to speak to me. I can't stand up at Sangha Night and talk about the Matrix. I just can't do it. But in a way, these are sort of the myths that we have today in modern England. These are our modern day myths. We don't sort of sit around the fire and tell stories to each other like we used to. These films are they're our myths. And good films that stick with you, films that change the way you think, how you view things, how you act, at least for a little while. These are films of this kind of mythic quality to them, this mythic motif. They point to something a bit deeper, a bit mysterious, something a bit mysterious. But one thing that it does require, it required me to do in sort of an opening up to this myth of the dream world, is to take myself seriously, really. So take myself seriously as a spiritual being, a spiritual human being. So there was a little part of me just saying, you can't be spiritual. You're from Stoke-on-Trent. It just doesn't. It doesn't happen. You can't do it. That's for people in the East. It's for tribes in the forest. In a way, it's not the same for you. So to remedy this, Padma Bhadra was here maybe a year ago, and he said something in one of his talks that really stuck with me. He said, don't play down the intensity of your experience. So don't make yourself boring. So we live more intense lives than we give ourselves credit for. So take yourself seriously in a way. So to give just a short synopsis of the Matrix for those who haven't seen it. So it's a science fiction film from the 90s, written and directed by the Wachowskis, and it's set in the future. And in this future, the world as perceived by most human beings is actually a simulated reality called the Matrix. And it's been created by these sentient machines to trap human minds in order to subdue and control them. So the story follows this main character, Neo, becomes the one who becomes fully awake, who wakes up from this dream, and it gives him the power to set the humans free. And in reflecting about this, because the Matrix is part of my childhood, it holds sway over lots of emotions. It's a lot of power. So as I say, I first watched it when I was really young, and it stayed with me on a deep level. And to kind of use the language that I know now, something resonated within me about this metaphor of waking up, about this idea of the world not being as it seems. I'm not interested in the other two films. I'm not interested in the finer points of the plot. The Matrix definitely isn't an effective refuge. It definitely won't solve life's problems, but it first opened me up to this tingling sensation that I felt to the response, this myth. So this idea of waking up. So there's and how it really spoke to me. So there's a brilliant quote in the film from Morpheus, who in a way is Neo's guide to becoming the one or waking up. And he says to him, so have you ever had a dream that you were so sure was real? What if you were unable to wake from that dream? How would you know the difference between the dream world and the real world? So feeling this emotion, feeling to what it points to behind these words, it moves my mind to interesting places. And it's picking up on this theme that it's a similar resonance with Buddhism, with why I'm so drawn to it. And there's a particular scene right at the end when Neo wakes up, and you get a shot of what he sees through his eyes. And what he sees through his eyes is the Matrix is coded, and it's this really distinctive green code running down like a black background. And he sees the world just code, just running down everything. He sees the world in code. yeah, dare I say it, this is a bit of what I imagine, you know, waking up might be like, or some sort of flavour of this experience. So you see conditionality running through the walls. Daniel's talked a bit about conditionality. You see conditionality in everything. You see the rising and passing away of all things, of everything you look at. You see that everything is insubstantial, is in constant flux and change. So it's this real sort of visual, direct experience of what it's like. I don't have much time, so I think I'm going to skip another little bit of the Matrix. So coming back to Buddhism, the Buddha is a title, so the Buddha's a title, and it literally means one who is awake, one who has woken up. And there's some Mahayana sutras that talk in this metaphor of living in a dream world. And in a way, what Buddhism did for me is that it sort of, I had this myth, this window to look through waking up. It expanded this window for me. It filled it out, so I could get a much more appreciation of what I was resonating with. So this is an extract from the Diamond Sutra. So he says, as stars, a fault of vision, as a lamp, a mock show, dewdrops or a bubble, a dream, a lightning flash or a cloud, so should one view what is conditioned. So you should view all of the fleeting worlds, a star at dawn, a bubble in a stream, a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, a flickering lamp, a phantom, and a dream. So for me, that resonates with what I first heard when I was 9 or 10. And again, from the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, if a bodhisattva, even in his dreams, see that all dharmas are like a dream, then that should be known as an irreversible monk of an irreversible bodhisattva. And immediately after he's woken up from a dream, he reflects, like a dream is all this that belongs to the triple world, and in that sense I shall teach about dharmas. So this comes with a warning, really, that you can. This really appeals to me, but you can lose yourself in the strangeness of reality, really. So this dream-like quality, in a way, you can lose yourself. So this is why I really value the emphasis of integration and positive emotion. In a way to turn myself into the kind of person that could hold this strangeness, really, that can hold this dream-like state. So there's a danger of becoming completely spaced out, to being unable to relate to people in like a very simple human way. And for me, without relating to other people, there's no point. Relations to other people is what matters. So balance is needed between this dream-like state and connection and integration and positive emotion. On my better days, really, that's what motivates me to practice, so I can hold this strangeness. And to have an image is really helpful of this. So on my personal shrine, I've got like traditional Buddhist things. And in the last few months, a backdrop has appeared of a canvas that someone kindly brought me, of the green matrix code just running down. So that's my backdrop to my shrine. And in a way, I was just thinking, is this all right? A little part of me was thinking, is this okay to do this? But it's the closest symbol I've got that sort of excites me, that points me to something behind words at the moment. It's very imperfect, but that's what I've got to work with at the moment. So I'm trying to embrace this symbol, to bring it into my mind. For me, it's like a window into the dream analogy that points into something deeper and that lies just slightly unseen. And it's what makes Buddhism, more than just a nice way to live. It's this otherness about it, like living in one big lucid dream that we're trying to shake ourselves up from, and this it's exciting, you know, that often there's a pull between two opposites in Buddhism, two seemingly contradictory things, and waking up from this dream, it's like. I imagine it's like, you know, these opposites no longer pull in opposite directions, but pull in the same directions. So yes, that's my talk on the metaphor of